Hello. Happy Friday, everyone. This is your favorite Christian fiction author, Felicia Kelly-Brookins, and I am coming on today to have a serious discussion with you. It is a discussion that is centered around the cost of telling your story. Now, if you have followed me on my social media pages, you have probably already seen some of the clips that I've shared talking about the cost of telling your story. For those of you all that may not know, one of the things that I do is assist aspiring authors or post authors on telling that story, on getting that story out, what that looks like for them, the cost of being able to tell that story, of actually going live with the public, knowing the things that you've gone through and how you're going to deal with that, the importance of counting the cost of sharing that. Well, today I want to do something slightly different, but still along that same vein. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the cost of telling your story, and I want to talk about that from my viewpoint of the things that I've seen in the media concerning two very tragic but very important incidents that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. And so I want to have a discussion with you um, about mothers, about mothers who have to tell stories of things that have occurred to them, have happened to them or their children. And I'm talking mostly about Nolan Wells and Karmelo Anthony and their mothers. And the fact that over the last couple of weeks, these two women have been pretty much thrown into the spotlight because of tragedies that have happened to their sons. And so, watching these different videos and reading the different things in the news, I started to think about the cost of a mother in that situation having to tell their story, what that must be like. Before a mother can stand in front of a camera, before she can write a public statement or even try to explain what has happened, um, she has to find the courage to speak about that. And speaking about that is still telling her story, telling her experience. It's also about having wisdom, to be able to protect themselves after the story leaves their mouth. And this same thing may apply to you in some way when it comes to you having to share your story as an aspiring author with other people. I want us to think about what it's like for those mothers to tell that story um, and this tragedy become public. They may have never been comfortable talking in public before, and now this tragedy has occurred and now it is public. And so they now have to find the courage to be able to tell it. And they have to do so really without fully counting the cost and only learning the cost along the way and what that cost can be. These two mothers are being watched, they're being judged, they're being questioned, screenshotted, and sometimes they're even attacked in social media by people who don't know them. Okay, they don't know their son, they don't know their family. And again, those are some of the same things you, as an aspiring author, wanting to tell your story. That's some of the things you have to consider as well, because you could find yourself in this same slight situation when it comes to telling your story or experience. So today I want to talk again about these two women and about the cost of telling their story as a mother, a writer, as an advocate, and as a storyteller. It's some things that should be considered before speaking publicly. But again, as I said earlier, in the case of these two mothers, they necessarily did not have the time to prepare. Things happen so fast, so unexpected in their lives. So I want to talk a little bit about the emotional and mental capacity, because that's the first thing that you want to think about as an aspiring author that wants to write their story. But it's also something that maybe these two mothers did not get an opportunity to think about, the emotional and mental capacity that it was going to take on them to stand out in front of the public and to share their story and their feelings in this tragedy. The second is the family's privacy and their safety. Again, you too, as an aspiring author wanting to tell your story and write your truth, this is something that you would have to consider, the cost and the impact when it comes to your family, their privacy, and your safety. First point, emotional and mental capacity. Let's talk about that one. So, the first thing these mothers need to ask themselves would be, can they speak publicly right now without breaking down, or afterward with no support in place as they tell their story? You, as an aspiring author, you want to ask yourself the same questions. Can I speak publicly right now without breaking down if I have to talk about my story? What if there's no one there as a support system for me when I have to do that? Are you, as the author, ready to do that? Public statements, they can reopen trauma over and over and over again. And that's the same case for these two mothers, the mothers of Nolan Wells and of Karmelo Anthony. Every interview, every comment, every headline, every repost can force them to relive this painful tragedy, this painful part of the story of their lives. You, as an aspiring author, have to also consider that cost of having to relive or possibly relive the painful parts of telling your story. With that being said, I would say make sure that you check your emotional readiness before you speak. In the case of these two mothers, they don't have time to check their emotional readiness. This has happened, and they have had to step out of their comfort zone on behalf of their sons and tell this story. Let's hope that you, as an aspiring author, don't have to go through this tragedy in order to be in a situation where you're telling your story. But you do, as an aspiring author, want to be in a situation where when you do, you are emotional ready to do so. Before going public, you want to ask yourself, am I speaking from a place of clarity, or am I speaking from the shock, the anger, the pressure, the fear, all of those emotions that come from a tragedy or experience in your life? Talk with yourself. It may sound crazy. You may say, I shouldn't talk to myself. But you have to ask yourself these questions. As I said in a previous interview with Dr. Teresa A. Smith, we were talking about the cost of telling your story. You have to talk with yourself before you step out to share your story. Just consider that. There is nothing wrong with being emotional, but when your emotions are raw, the public may see that. They may not be to handle the pain that you portray out. They may not be to handle that and be gracious or understanding with it. As in the example of these two mothers of Nolan Wells and Karmelo Anthony, there are individuals that are out here on social media and in the news media, and they are not handling these mothers' grief with grace. They're not handling their story and experience, the telling of it, with compassion. And so that is another thing that you, as an aspiring author, have to decide or have to try to recognize, is that you have to be able to understand and accept that not everybody's going to handle your pain with care. Sometimes you may need to breathe through it, you need to pray, um, consult with someone, gather your thoughts, and decide what you can say without harming yourself any further emotionally or mentally. That is something important to consider, again, when you're writing your story or telling your story. So tip number 1 was to check your emotional readiness before you speak. Tip number 2, have support waiting after your statement or after the discussion about your story. As you can see with these two mothers, they have their family unit there with them. They have those friends and family with them to be a backup for them, to be a support for them. Maybe they didn't get to prepare all the words that they said before they had to step out in front of that camera. You, as an aspiring author, I would say to you, prepare your words. Prepare your words. Prepare to have some type of aftercare when you have released this story, when you've hit send, when you hold the book in your hand for the first time, when you stand up before a crowd and you have to talk about your book, why you wrote it, and your story. In your case, it is so important to have that support system there for you, as well as it is for these two mothers. Now, that could be a counselor, that may be a pastor, best friend, family member, maybe a legal advisor, but just somebody that is there, after you've shared your story. Because once you shared it, the emotional trash, you know, the crash of it can come later on. So you need that support system after you've put it out there and shared your story. I'm sure that these two mothers, they have that in place for them. And I'm sure there are many times there is an emotional crash for them after they've had to stand up in front of a crowd, in front of a camera, and go on to a talk show and talk about this tragedy that has occurred to them. Because again, that is a part of the cost of them having to tell this story. But they have to be a voice, and they have a right to be a voice and express their tragedy and what they're going through and what has occurred with their loved one. They have a right to tell their truth. Now, the world may move on to the next headline, but those mothers, they still have to live with that pain. And many times, you as aspiring authors are trying to write your book and you are still living with that pain, or you've even written it and you're still dealing with that pain. So, having someone there in your corner is extremely important. Tip number 3, when we're dealing with the mental and emotional capacity of telling your story, decide what you will not consume. What do I mean by that? Decide what you will not consume. When I say that, I mean that every comment doesn't deserve your attention. Every comment is not worth you even responding to or answering. Even if you're standing in front of a crowd talking about your story, if you're sharing something on social media and there's a post that may be negative, it may not necessarily require that you give it any energy. And I'm sure that the mothers of these two boys realize that and know that for themselves as they step out to tell the stories about their children. They realize every comment doesn't deserve their energy, and every stranger doesn't deserve access to them. Just because you're in their space doesn't mean you deserve to be there or have a right or that they have to pour themselves out or explain themselves to you. And that goes the same with you as the aspiring author. Before speaking publicly, I would also say decide who is going to monitor your social media. Um, there may be places where on your platforms that you need to have your comments turned off. You may want to decide if someone else needs to review your messages for you for your emotional and mental safety. I'm sure that this has also been the case with Nolan and Karmelo's parents and their family. They probably have had to, if they were on social media, go off of social media or turn off comments because that thing can be taxing emotionally and mentally. And finally, I would say protect your mind. Okay. Protect your mind. That may mean that you have to refuse to read the cruel things that people say on social media about you, about your story. You have to just step over those things a lot of times because you may still be in the process of healing, before you write. But that in itself, too, is a cost you have to consider. When you're writing this book, what place is it coming from? Is it being used as a tool or as a weapon? We've talked about that earlier on the cost of telling your story. And so these are just some tips that I wanted to share with you when it comes to the cost of telling your story. And I wanted to share it with you from my viewpoint of having seen all the things that have transpired over the last couple of weeks with these two mothers and the tragedies and the way that they and their families and friends have all of a sudden been put out into the public eye because they're telling their story. They may not be writing it down right now, but they are verbally telling it. They still have to go out and talk about it and face people. And they still have to deal with the mental and emotional capacity of being able to do just that. And you, as a writer, may write yours down, but I want you to also see just how similar it is, whether you're verbally doing it or you're writing it down and publishing a book. It still has to be the same considerations in place. Okay? And so, just to run back through those tips really quickly when we're talking about the cost of telling your story. Again, we're talking about it from emotional and mental capacity. And we're also going to be talking about it a little further later on when it comes to part two of the cost of telling your story. Just remember, number one, check your emotional readiness before you speak. Before going public, just ask yourself, where am I speaking from? Is it a place of clarity, shock, fear, anger, or pressure? Okay, take a few minutes to evaluate. Number two, have a support system waiting for you after you've talked about your story or after you've introduced it or made a statement. Maybe it's a good idea for you, take some time to reach out to someone and say, hey, can you come with me? Can you be there in the audience? Can you be there with me when I have my book launch, my book signing? Or can you stand here with me as I hit submit and send this manuscript off? Okay. And number three, decide what you will not consume. Prepare yourself as an author when you step out there and your story meets the public. Every comment doesn't have to be deserved or addressed. You have to decide for your own mental and emotional well being what you're going to engage, what you're going to respond to, just as these parents have of these young boys. They've had to do the same thing. And so you must ask yourself these questions and have these conversations with yourself as an aspiring author and writer preparing to tell their story. That is all that I have for today. I will definitely be back to continue to talk with you about the cost of telling your story. My name is Felicia Kelly-Brookins. I am your author and storytelling strategist. And so if you need help preparing to write your story, if you need help deciding what it is that you want to do and how you want to do it when it comes to your story or your manuscript, then feel free to reach out to me and let me help you count the cost of telling your story and prepare you for telling your story. You can reach me at author Felicia Kelly-Brookins. I'm on all social media platforms. You can email me at authorfeliciabrookins@gmail.com, and I will be glad to set up a consultation with you. Time for us to talk about what it looks like in you preparation for writing your story and even releasing your story and preparing for your book launch. You have an amazing, amazing day and continue to write your story and tell your truth.